In tonight's roundup from Dorchester, there's news about transportation, politics, and nasty weather, from deep snow to high water. And to fill us in is the news editor from the Dorchester Reporter, Jennifer Smith. Thank you very much for being with us again, Jennifer. First of all, talk about the weather challenges. I mean, even before the snow, all those places, I know it's not just Morrissey Boulevard underwater. Talk about how bad that was in that earlier storm.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hit by 3 nor'easters in the last 2 weeks. Fortunately, this last one didn't have a lot of flooding that goes along with it, but anyone that lives along Morrissey Boulevard and Day Boulevard knows that one high tide will knock out the entire throughway. And we've been seeing that a lot more lately, which is why there's been a push for the past going on 30 years now to shore up those roadways, which are right along the coast and incredibly vulnerable to flooding. And we've been seeing a lot of that lately.
Shoring up means not just putting something along the perimeter, but actually elevating them too,
yeah,
right?
Actually trying to raise the roads. So you have a few problems on Morrissey Boulevard specifically. And one of them is that it's pretty much right at the level of the coastline. So it doesn't take much of a tide to really swamp it. And also just drainage as well. So if there's a high tide, if nothing's draining off, then it just remains out of commission for a while. So the proposal that's kind of going through the process right now, finally, a lot of folks would say, is saying, let's start at this middle area where it's right alongside the bay, it's flooded all the time, and at minimum, let's kind of work on that. Let's raise the road. Let's allow for more space for bike and pedestrian routes. Let's really make this a parkway, which is what it is. Even though a lot of people use it kind of as an alternative to taking 93, Morrissey Boulevard is at its core a Department of Conservation and Recreation stretch. So it's supposed to be 35 miles an hour. People are supposed to be using it for more than just kind of racing up and down through Dorchester. And that's kind of a hard thing to do when half of it's underwater.
Of course, another story you've been following, it's a citywide story about the body cameras, but Dorchester was, I guess, the location of a showdown over cameras between a civilian and a police officer. But talk about the importance of body cameras, at least as you see it in Dorchester.
Yeah, so Dorchester is one of the communities that has higher rates of homicides. Overall, Part 1 crime in the city is down. A lot of folks would point out it's 7% down overall, and that includes everything from homicides to larcenies to rapes to assaults. But there does tend to be some friction in communities of color, of which there's a lot in Dorchester and Mattapan, and the police that serve them. Now, fortunately, one thing that you'll hear from a lot of folks in the community is that they've got good relationships with their specific officers that are actually out there every day and interacting with them. But there's still kind of this amount of trepidation around how the police force in general interacts with communities of color. And in the case of body cameras, there is this sense, and this is why the Boston branch of the NAACP, for instance, is on board behind the body cameras, is it's just having that additional level of precaution, that additional level of security, and just the knowledge that you aren't doing your job unobserved. So the advance that's happened on the body camera front, of course, is Mayor Walsh, who's been a little bit hesitant about it, did say, we'll fund it. We'll put out a full citywide body camera program and see how that goes. And the police are saying, yeah, we've had a good response from the officers wearing the cameras. And even though there's only been a slight dip in complaints and use of force between the officers who did and didn't wear the cameras, people felt better having them on. And you see that reflected in pilots across the country looking at body cameras. For instance, Washington, D.C., where even though there wasn't a change in officer behavior, the police chief in D.C. said, frankly, we got a lot of positive response from the community. So it's as much a moral boost as it might actually be an observational adjustment.
Well, one thing that has got the attention of both you and Bill Forey, the publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, is the contrast between this long struggle to maximize the potential of the Fairmount-Indigo corridor and this sudden fascination with gondolas into, Fort Point Channel and the Seaport District.
Yeah, we keep joking in the office that the kind of gondola we might need if Morrissey keeps flooding is the Venetian kind, just paddle around. But yeah, so it's actually connected to the Morrissey thing in a way, where you have these neighborhoods like Dorchester that are very reliant upon these major public transit routes. And the Fairmount line, like we talked about last time I was here, is basically trying to be used as a normal rapid transit line for those who are on it. It's a 9.2-mile line, there are 7 stops on it, and it takes you from South Station to Reedville. And the advocates along the line really view this as a social justice priority. It's an area that's really been struck hard by environmental issues, transit woes in general. It's kind of a transit desert unless you're okay with taking the bus or the Fairmount line. And they've been saying, give us a pilot. We're an easy line to adjust, give us faster trains. Let's see if we can actually connect this part of the city better. And then there is sort of that contrast with the gondolas, the proposal to string those along the seaport to circumvent the seaport South Boston traffic that we all know pretty well at this point. And it serves as a good illustration of the difference between a public project and a private project, where, for instance, I talked to State Rep Nick Collins, who represents South Boston and is running to represent a decent chunk of Dorchester and Mattapan as well, if he's successful in the 1st Suffolk District. And his position, basically, looking at these 2 areas that he would represent, is if there's private funding for it, if there's that kind of interest level for a gondola, absolutely let private dollars be spent to pursue that, but make sure that as a state, we're actually focused on the areas where public dollars need to go, like the Fairmount line and these other areas that have historically been underserved.
One more issue, you're always following this at the Reporter, is politics. We have a race for district attorney because Dan Comley's not going to run for re-election, and I guess there's at least one more name to mention.
Yes, so since we were last on, there are 2 more. So Greg Henning jumped in last week, who's been at the district attorney's office for 10 years with a slight break in the middle, and was last running the gang unit for a year and a half. And as of this past week, she pulled papers on March 9th. Rachel Rawlings, who's the former chief legal counsel for Massport, a past assistant U.S. attorney, and she's thrown her name into the ring. And the thing that's interesting to me, looking at this field of candidates pursuing the DA position at the moment, is they're all running on pretty progressive platforms. None of them are saying, basically, go hard on the chief prosecution angle of it, even though it is, of course, the head law enforcement position in Suffolk County. They're saying, let's allow for the humanity of the people that interact with the justice system. Let's make sure that we're taking into account how they got into this situation in the first place, and what tweaks can we make to the office to make it a little bit more compassionate to those that actually participate in it. And Rawlings, of course, is also kind of taking that approach. She says, we can both not sacrifice the safety of the public and also allow for flexibility in how we approach prosecution.
Yeah, sounds like a criminal justice advocacy road. We should
Yeah.
finally mention, if people want to follow up for more things as they break, you've got the Dorchester Reporter website, and you've got your own Twitter feed, so tell us about that.
I do. So if you want to go and read up on everything that's happening in Dorchester, we're at .news.com, and if you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at .news, or if you want to follow me specifically, I'm at jen.smith.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Of course, thanks, Chris.
Jennifer Smith from the Dorchester Reporter.